Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
City elections, the legislature, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian. Thanks for joining us. We are joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists, including Toby Sells, news editor at the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Julia Baker, who covers public safety for us at the Daily Memphian. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you.
Along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. We'll start with, there's so much news going on, and we haven't done a roundtable in a bit anyway. But Bill, let's start with an update on the city elections, the mayor's race and the city council races. We have done now, 6 interviews with the major candidates for mayor. Next week will be former Mayor Harrington. The week after that will be Floyd Bonner. Prior to that, we've done, and I'm going to screw it up, Karen Camper, Frank Colvett, who has since dropped out, J.W. Gibson, Michelle McKissick, Van Turner, and Paul Young. All those are available on WKNO.org or the Daily Memphian site. We've got extensive coverage and profiles and candidate questionnaires of those same 7, 8 candidates that I just mentioned. We are, early voting begins September 15th. The election day is October 5th. Your take on where we are?
I think we're in the most critical part of the campaign, and make no mistake about it, this ballot has been dominated by the race for mayor to such an extent that the 13 city council races have really kind of lived in the shadow of the mayor's race. Some of that is as expected. We have not had a mayor's race without an incumbent seeking re-election, with the exception of the special election in 2009, since 1982. So it's been a while since we've been at this stage. I think that what you're going to see in this 2-week period leading up to early voting and during that 2 weeks are some major shifts by some of the candidates trying to make something happen for them in what's actually a pretty close race, I think, among the 7 major contenders.
And I should note too, we haven't been able to do city council coverage here on just because there's so many races, there's so many districts and so on. But Bill, I believe Sam Hardiman, others at Daily Memphian have done profiles of all those races. Those are also available on dailymemphian.com. Are there any other, I do this every year, sometimes 3 times a year with every cycle. Are there any other city elections on this ballot, or
No.
just those 2?
There's
no surprises on the ballot that for me or others.
This is the mayor's race and all 13 of the seats on the city council. We don't have a city court clerk's race because that is no longer an elected position by city council action. We do not have races for city court judges until 4 years from now.
All right. Well, again, all that coverage you can get past, interviews with all these candidates, the debate we did, all that's on KNO as well as Daily Memphian, and a lot of writing from Bill and Sam and others. We just recently, I'll go to you, Toby. We had a special session at the legislature on a topic that is very, very front and center in the mayor's race, the session was specific to guns, but it came out of the shooting at the school in Nashville. Give us your take on how that session went.
Well, first, this thing has already been post-mortemed by others, better than I could here. It wrapped up last week. It was a short session, really super focused on public safety, gun safety, whatever you want to call it. Different groups called it different things. From what you heard from so many people was that very little got done up there. The governor called this thing many months ago. And then set it for August. And by the time we got there were hundreds of bills filed from the House and Senate members. And then what we were left with after a tumultuous special session up there were 4 bills that were only allowed through by the Tennessee State Senate. You saw even House and Senate Republicans really infighting there about how many ideas, how many bills that we could see get through the legislature. Ended up with 4. We had 3 bills of substance that made it through, and 1 bill basically to pay for the entire thing that we got there. And I think what we ended up with were a bill that gave some sales tax reprieve to gun locks and gun safety devices and things like that. We are going to get a special or a new annual report from the TBI on human trafficking, and then the other one just kind of codified Governor Lee's already existing executive order on background checks. And so that's really all the legislation that we got from this thing that was super hyped on public safety. What I wrote about a couple of weeks ago for the Flyer was really what showed as the Republican supermajority. They just really showed their dominance up there in so many ways, as how many bills can get through the legislature. What are we even going to talk about while we're up here? And then they did it in other ways. You know, they silenced even a House member, Justin Jones, who they had done that before. They were silencing members of the crowd. They had state troopers come in and carry away folks that were holding signs. The sign thing is a whole other thing that went through up there. At one point, House Speaker Cameron Sexton, he cleared the galleries of people protesting or yelling down and trying to clap or do whatever. So the story that I wrote really was about the GOP flex up on Capitol Hill up there. Looking forward, I can only imagine that we are going to have a lot of those bills that didn't get taken up. There was a lot of bills that were reviewed in committee, but then by the time they ended up, Senate and House, talking about those, which ones are we going to do, on those 4 were there. Lots of great ideas, I think, left on the table. Hopefully those will come back in January, and we'll have to kind of see how it goes from there.
It's interesting. I was looking back. We did a poll at the Daily Memphian back, I think it was in May, maybe it was April, about crime and attitudes around crime and what people want. And I know there are people watching the show saying, "Well, I'm glad there were not a lot of changes to guns."
Sure.
That's their point of view. But it was really striking when we did that poll that in the city of Memphis, 86% of respondents, and this is a third-party scientific poll, 86% wanted at least modest gun control, and of them, about half wanted dramatic controls on guns. But even when you go to the county, which is, people think of as being, maybe much more conservative, it was still 73% of the people in the county outside of Memphis who wanted at least modest gun control, and about half of that, a little over half of that, wanting dramatic controls. And so Senator Brent Taylor has been on the show, I think with us, Bill, talking about, the challenge of being, and he's a Republican from the parts of Memphis and Germantown and so on, being a Republican up there who would like some quote unquote common sense gun controls, some permitting, but he just doesn't find any really affinity among many of his other senators to get that kind of, even what I think most people would say would be modest controls in place.
Well, he and John Gillespie each proposed bills that did not make the cut during the special session that would have dealt in some way with gun control. So this is not simply Democrats versus Republicans. This was Republicans versus Republicans, right, to a major degree.
Bringing you, Julia, it is. I couldn't actually believe this, but it makes sense that we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of Shelby County District Attorney Steve Mulroy having been elected. We also just went through the tragic, 1-year anniversary of Eliza Fletcher's kidnapping and the whole the kind of mass traveling shooting that was Ezekiel Kelly. It was quite a year. As we mark those events and as we go into a second year of Shelby County District Attorney Steve Mulroy, what are you looking at? What are you covering?
DA Mulroy, he's launched a few changes into the DA's office. One that's probably most current is his office is expediting the release of officer-involved fatal shootings. There was a 19-year-old who was shot in June, or he was killed during a traffic stop in June with the Shelby County Sheriff officer, and that was released just a couple of weeks ago. So that's something that we're seeing an expedition. We're not used to seeing 2 months. And then the TBI has recently concluded an investigation in Jalen McKenzie, who was killed before Tyree Nichols in December. So that's probably more about normal. It takes probably between a few months into a year. But I think we're hopefully going to see more expedited, videos.
Right. The other one that and we've had DA Mulroy on at least twice since he's been elected, which we appreciate immensely, because he's been under fire or criticism or just questions about issues around bail reform, bail setting. We did a really good interview with him some months ago, not for anything I did, but just where he walked through, he's a former law professor, how bail is set, how it isn't. And then we have sort of the informal editorial board of the Daily Memphian sat down with the head of the judicial commissioners probably a month ago now, and we have a big Q&A coming out, I think in the next week or so, and then we have information about all the judicial commissioners, which are not picked by the DA, but are very much a part of this criticism or these questions people have around the DA's office. Why is bail not set higher? Why are people released when they're released? So one, I would just point people to Daily Memphian. In the next week or so, you'll have this big look and Q&A at the work of the judicial commissioners, how it works, who these people are. But also DA Mulroy has been sort of under fire, and I don't know, do you see him changing as he goes into his second year in terms of the questions and concerns people have, rightly or wrongly, about some people being released for very little bail or released with very long records of prior offenses?
Right. I think there have been a lot of misconceptions about that. Plenty of people are under the misconception that the DA's office is who sets the bail, but what they do is they recommend bail. And so does the defense attorney, and then the judge or the judicial commissioner ultimately sets the bail, depending on what process we're in. And if it's a suspect getting into jail, the DA's office and the defense attorney are not part of that process of recommending bail. So ultimately, that is up to whoever the judicial officer is. We've seen DA Mulroy, even attempt to revoke bail. Chase Harris, who was accused in the Huey shooting back in, I think it was April, DA Mulroy, he filed a motion to revoke that bail. So I think we might see some more things like that in the near future.
Any other thoughts on DA Mulroy's first year, Bill or Toby?
Yeah, I mean, what this revolves around is the basic presumption that someone who is arrested by the police, someone who is charged, is innocent until proven guilty. In the past, that hasn't always been reflected in the decisions that were made. So now the system is changing under the threat of a lawsuit by different groups, and it's proving to be a difficult concept to enforce when it comes to the machinations on this. Basically, the judges make the decision. The judicial commissioners make a part of the decision, and that is what is at play here. For all of the talk about judicial reform, criminal justice reform, this is probably the most profound and yet the simplest part of that whole equation, I think.
And what Bill says is absolutely right. I just want a special note to anybody on Nextdoor or on these Facebook groups out there. DA Mulroy didn't make this up himself. He didn't bring it into office with him. He is just the person that was there at the same time this lawsuit was going through. The lawsuit, the crux of it was basically, we don't want people sitting in jail because you can't afford to pay bail. And they wanted another level of a context to be thrown in there when they're looking at setting your bail. And you see so many people, and they're seeing these folks get out of 201 almost the same day. I understand the frustration, but folks, it's not just him. It's a lot of people that were pushing this thing, and we've not yet settled into the system to really understand it and make it work just right.
Yeah, and former DA Amy Weierke, who's a Republican, she was also in support of that bail reform. So.
Yeah. Don't you think, I'm putting you in a place of speculating, but we were just talking about the legislative session. In the last legislative session, there were some proposals, again, in many cases from folks like Brent Taylor and John Gillespie. There was one around blended sentencing for juveniles that gave a little more tools about who can get out, who can be treated as an adult, who can be monitored longer. I'm doing a bad job explaining that. But don't you think this bail, if you put we bet $3 that bail reform and bail setting is going to get, if not some kind of change passed at the legislature, there's going to be proposals around that, and probably tougher on crime type proposals. Right?
If I had a crystal ball, I would say all signs point to yes. I guess that's an 8-ball, but I think so. What we saw from the legislature were mostly tough on crime bills, nothing that went for guns. They kind of took that out at the very beginning, said we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on what we think we can control. Tough on crime was top of the list.
Yeah. I know that Senator Taylor, he's wanting to bring in a bill on blended sentencing again, which did not pass during the special session or the one before that. And Representative John Gillespie, he's working on a bill that would differentiate between an aggravated assault with a gun and without a gun. It would change the sentence on that.
Yeah. We'll shift gears from crime and public safety. We might come back to a few things on that, but to Tom Lee Park officially open. The new Tom Lee Park officially open. I know you were down. I think you were there. I was there at one point. You were writing about it. We all wrote about it. You want to start, Toby? It's been not without controversy to get here.
That's right. I can't remember exactly how many years this thing has been in the works, but as soon as Memphis River Parks Partnership kind of took over from the Riverfront Development Corporation, Tom Lee Park was one of the first things they wanted to get done. They did some smaller projects that were amazing. And this one was kind of this huge effort they wanted to undertake, ended up being $63 million. The first, I remember a long time ago going down to Tom Lee Park, and inside they had a model from the architects, landscape architects, that showed what a new Tom Lee Park could look like. And I remember at the time, my editor at the time, Bruce Van Weingarten, said I was in there at the same time the Memphis in May guys were in there looking at it, and they were just raising eyebrows, scratching heads, and and thought, oh, this might not work out. And early on, the folks at the Parks Partnership, they weren't worried about Memphis in May. They thought, we can figure out a way to make this work together, and didn't think it was going to be much of a controversy. As we went on, we figured out that has been the central controversy of the entire thing, how to make it work. Since then, we've had Memphis in May in the new park. The Music Fest went one way, Barbecue Fest went the other way, and it's left now people wondering what are the future of those festivals in the park. I think there's a way to work it out, but again, I'm not the guy to ask about them.
We had Carol Coletta on the show in the last month, the head of Memphis River Parks Partnership, and she said, her take was that Bill, I think you and I did that interview, that the Music Fest went really well, and you could see how that could work and maybe even work better. Barbecue Fest had not gone as well, but she was not saying it couldn't happen. The Memphis in May folks, there's a big bill that's got to be covered for damages to the park. Mm-hmm. I know the city's covering part of that, but they have not been. We've asked to have folks from Memphis in May on the show numerous times, and they generally haven't wanted to. Mm-hmm. Jim Holt was on the show many, many years ago now. It's kind of, we're at a weird point, I think. And just in the last, 2 weeks ago, the Chamber of Commerce took over the international portion of Memphis in May, and is now going to run that whole program, make it more celebrating our country, but also an economic development kind of endeavor. What's next, do you think, for Music Fest and Barbecue Fest?
I think what's next in that specific relationship is that Memphis in May makes this decision that they have said they have started down the road on, and that is possibly a new location, almost certainly for the barbecue contest, but possibly for the music festival as well. Memphis in May usually has an annual meeting every August. That is where they talk about, first of all, the financials of the festival, whether they lost money or made money on the festival. And then they talk about future steps for the festival, which the festival has not been the same over the years. It started in 1977. If you could go back in time and go to the Memphis in May Festival, the month of events in 1977, you would be amazed, because the Sunset Symphony, which is no longer there, would be the main event. Mm-hmm. And the Beale Street Music Festival would be on a much smaller scale, and it wouldn't all be in Tom Lee Park. So all that to say that the August annual meeting of Memphis in May didn't happen. Yeah. And whenever it happens, it will be watched pretty closely to see what the next moves are there.
Yeah, Toby.
Just to tie the knot on this, I also want to tell those folks on Nextdoor and Facebook groups that the brand new.
I know you're spending like,
you know where I spend my time.
Really under your skin,
my secrets have been revealed, but the specs for the park were given by Memphis in May. They said this is what we need to make successful festivals in the park, and the Parks Partnership built around that.
And that was part of the mediation.
That's exactly right.
And the mayor has said that, I think on this show, he said it elsewhere. Carl Coletta said, it was a mediation. These were the specs, how many booths, but it's a little unclear what has happened and what happens next. We'll switch to the zoo, and many people have likened the controversy over Tom Lee Park to the old controversy over the zoo and parking on the Greensward and Overton Park. Full disclosure, I was a board member and at one time a board chair during a lot of that fight for the Overton Park Conservancy. I'm no longer part of the board. The zoo, it's not a happy thing. It's not a good thing. They announced layoffs this week. I think we all covered it, but Toby, you wanted to talk about that. They laid off some 25 part-time people?
That's right. I think a lot of education people, they let go over there for different reasons. You read different things. But I think the most troubling thing about that was that these layoffs were due to some financial troubles, and they didn't outline what those financial troubles were for the zoo. But anytime you see an institution like that having troubles, it's worrisome. I got their 990s, went back over 3 or 4 years worth of their finances over there, and just profit and loss. That's not how they call it in nonprofit world, but their finances are erratic over there. They'll have years of they'll make some money. They'll have years where they lose $3 million. They'll have years where they put up a big substantial revenue number, and it's been all over the place. I have no idea how zoo revenues work, and I'm sure that might be true to form, but it's different than a lot of other nonprofits, I'll say. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens with them next.
Yeah, and we should note too, I mean, COVID for any kind of an attraction like that was just terrible.
Yes.
I mean, they really, and that was, no one's fault, obviously. I mean, restaurants, all kinds of entertainment venues really suffered during COVID.
And the zoo was at a pretty critical point during the pandemic. There was a point during the pandemic, at the high point of the pandemic, when the zoo was actually considering dispersing its animals to other places that could care for them. That's how bad it was.
Yeah.
And so it's not hard to believe that there could have been some financial shockwaves still reverberating from that.
You bet.
With 4 or 5 minutes left here, I'll stick with, I don't know, controversies in public spaces. We can do, that's our theme. But the Brooks Museum, which has begun construction downtown of its new location, it's 2025 or so, planned to move from Overton Park into the new big facility downtown. We had Zoe Carr, the executive director, on recently in the last month or so to talk about that move, talk about the park. They had been in mediation. It's a show of mediation about with the heirs, Friends of Our Riverfront, and the heirs of the Overton heirs. I'm going to let Bill talk about all that, but there's enough going on. The suit was filed that could have stopped construction. It has not stopped construction. And at that point, I'm going to let Bill explain what's going on with this lawsuit.
This was
to stop construction.
This is about a 280-page complaint that was filed in Chancery Court. There will be a probably very well-attended hearing coming up on September 20th on this. Much of the filing deals with this 200-year history going back to the city founders and what they wanted in terms of a public promenade that the Brooks Museum site downtown would be a part of. There's a lot to sort out there. There's a lot that's happened in 200 years, including the whole thing about
Right.
do you use
Understatement of the show.
Yes. Are you able to set aside some public use of land in perpetuity? It's going to be a pretty technical argument. It's going to be a really interesting lawsuit.
The heirs have tried to stop the River Walk, the Bluff Walk, right? That was some decades ago, which is the walk sort of above Tom Lee Park. We come full circle, and failed at that. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Well, the heirs have talked about that in the past, and in the lawsuit they actually make a distinction between the Bluff Walk and the promenade, which is larger. They're both kind of tied together on this. I think I'm still kind of checking because you're dealing with 200 years here, but I believe this is the first time that the heirs have actually gone to court over this. They have been a part of discussions like a second convention center hotel at the Mud Island Garage. They got involved in that, but there was no lawsuit filed. I think this is the first time that this has actually gone to a judge.
And with just a couple minutes left, I want to circle back to Julia. We're talking about downtown. There was a terrible incident downtown some weeks ago with shooting and people at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning doing burnouts, and it was very troubling. They've since put a downtown kind of security plan in place. Talk about how that's going.
Yeah, it's, I actually drove through downtown recently and saw it, and it's quite a maze to go through, but it's kind of early, but it does seem like what incidents we are seeing are right outside that zone where MPD is implementing its safety plan. So it's unclear as to whether it's pushing it out, but we'll see in the coming months how that goes, because it's going to be a permanent fixture with MPD and the sheriff's office, monitoring downtown.
Just a minute left here. What I'll do, I'll remind everyone that because the issue of the moment is Election Day, city elections, both all the city council races. Is that right,
All
Bill?
13 city council
All
seats.
13 city council seats, as well as the mayor's race. We talked about the top. That Election Day is October 5th. Early voting begins September 15th. We've done extensive coverage, one-on-one interviews with most of the mayoral candidates. Former Mayor Harrington comes up next week. We pre-recorded that. It was a very, very interesting interview. And then Floyd Bonner, Sheriff Floyd Bonner, another of the leading candidates. He'll be in 2 weeks from when this airs. We've done Paul Young, Michelle McKissick, Karen Camper, J.W. Gibson, Van Turner, Frank Colvett, who's since dropped out of the race. I think I covered everyone. We also did a debate with 4 or 5 of those candidates that's available at WKNO.org or on the Daily Memphian site. And although we have not done city council shows because there's just too many races and too many candidates, we do have content on Daily Memphian about those races that Bill and I believe Sam Hardiman and others have put out there. And Flyer, I'm sure as well, is doing coverage. The Commercial Appeal I know is doing coverage of the race. It's a big race. It's the biggest race. If you haven't registered to vote, it's too late, right? September 5th. So as we record this, it will have been too late to vote. All that stuff is available at dailymemphian.com, on WKNO.org. That is all the time we have this week. Join us again next week for our interview with Willie Harrington. If you missed any of the show tonight, you can get this show also at WKNO.org, or you can download it as a podcast from iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.